Good evening, everyone, and thank you for listening to the Futurati Podcast, where we dive into how emerging technologies will impact the world and your bank account. I'm Trent Fowler, and joining me, as always, is my co-host, Thomas Fry. Thomas and I are futurists, keynote speakers, and consultants with decades of experience in analyzing trends and communicating new developments to audiences across the world. Reach out to us at futuratipodcast.com/contact-futurati if you'd like to hire us for consulting, to speak at your event, or to advertise on our podcast. Thomas, we just wrapped up a fantastic interview with Matt Genovese, and it took a number of fascinating twists and turns. He runs a company called Planorama Design, and he has rather a deep background, much deeper than I realized. So when I read his bio, I was thinking, okay, so he's a UI UX guy. He's probably got some software engineering chops. Now, he used to work in formal verification of semiconductors and was writing assembly in middle school. So he's got a very serious technical chops and a really fascinating perspective on generative AI and the ways it will impact coding and application development and the way people interface with software. So were there a couple of major high points in the conversation for you?
Well, the fact that he lives in Brazil is giving him much more of a global perspective on things. But I liked his answer on when I asked him about if we're just going to see fewer and fewer programmers in the world, or if we actually set our sights on bigger and bigger things to accomplish. And he tended to agree that we're probably going to be aiming towards the bigger and bigger things to accomplish, which I think that becomes kind of a natural evolution for this. Yeah, it's too easy to start predicting the doom and gloom and start getting headlines over all these jobs going to go away. All these programmers won't have jobs in the future. And that's just not how it usually works. So so that's just one of them. But I think his overall perspective on this is really quite fascinating.
It was interesting that he and I shared a number of parallel conclusions. So, he noted in the interview that he thinks eventually you're just going to make applications on the fly, which is something I've been thinking about a lot as well. So I mentioned in the interview that I don't know any small business person who doesn't have an idea for an app that would make some part of their business easier, but it's so prohibitively expensive to get into it. And I think that in the future, it will be possible to just summon those applications. And so it's fascinating to think about how that will impact the application ecosystem going forward. When you no longer have to hire a team of developers to put together a messaging application for your business or something to track invoices or whatever, if QuickBooks is just too much for you, what will that actually mean? And it was fun kind of kicking that around with him.
Yeah, he has a wealth of knowledge in the background there, starting with the Commodore 64 and even before then, coming into today's world. I relate to that quite well. So yeah. I never did have a Commodore 64. I had even worse computers to start with. So,
well, you're both much older than I am. You're both much older than I am. So I'm going to go Google Commodore 64 so I know what you're talking about. While I'm doing that, listeners, I hope you enjoy episode 137 with Matt Genovese. Tonight, we're joined by Matt Genovese. Matt is the CEO of Planorama Design, a software user experience design professional services company based in Austin, Texas. With over 25 years of experience in high tech, spanning semiconductors to software, Matt has a long track record of launching successful products. He and his team at Planorama design simple and intuitive software from otherwise complex software or IoT systems and simultaneously accelerate time to market while reducing internal costs for their clients. If you enjoyed this interview, please subscribe to the podcast and don't forget to share it with your friends. And in the meantime, check out our website, futuratipodcast.com. Matt, thanks so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you, Trent. Pleasure to be here.
Let's hear a little bit about your background, your interests, and what brought you to working on the problems that you're working on today.
Sure. Well, where to start? So my background, I started as a child, and I got into computers a long time ago, back on the Commodore VIC-20. And always been part of my life. I was doing assembly language as a kid. I ended up going to college, university at RIT for computer engineering, and coming down working for Motorola down in Austin. And I spent about the first half of my career in hardware and working on logic design and verification, which actually turned out to be very useful in other ways, because you end up having to work towards a spec, work on a chip that you don't get to send out updates, or if you do, they cost millions and millions of dollars, unlike software. So you get a sense for how important things are, like verification and making sure it works out of the gate and things like that. And I spent the other half of my career in software. And so I've, kind of fast forwarding a bit, I started the company I have now, Planorama, which has a professional services arm, Planorama Design, focusing on design of software products, the UX and UI, all the requirements, and deploying to dev-ready or dev-ready documentation for development teams. But we also have a R&D arm, where we've been focusing on building applications that solve problems in our space with product development teams. And I've worked at many different software companies, and the one challenge I've seen is that they always tend to struggle with good software documentation, good internal product requirement documentation. Agile software and the agile methodology sometimes doesn't sound like it prioritizes documentation, but I would say that documentation is very important if you need to have teams know what to do and to work in a very smooth process. And so we've been working on an internal project for ourselves called Symphonia. And the idea is to help consolidate the source of truth for product requirements, right? All that said, when AI started becoming a bit more prevalent over the past couple of years, I started looking at it and saying, well, how can this help with product requirements? How can this help get us to a point where, we can have solid requirements that the development team, the UX team, the stakeholders, everybody can kind of gather around and understand. And so we built some tools in order to do that. We built a little proof of concept called user story generator, .ai, that helps you write user stories. And we built that in, with the results, with the things that we learned from that. We built it into our product called Symphonia that we're using ourselves. And again, trying to use AI to assist in the product development process is probably the best way I can say it.
And, so Matt, yeah. A couple lifetimes ago, I was an ergonomics engineer, a human factors engineer, doing a lot of similar things to what you're doing right now, but I was doing it more with hardware than software. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things that struck me is that when ChatGPT came out, that the input box is at the bottom of the page. That just seems wrong. I wanted to get your feedback on that. Is that wrong?
asking the big questions here on the Futurati podcast.
Oh,
where should the text box go?
Oh God, if this is what I'm quoted on, I'm going to be a very sad person. I think I'm gonna hit that one to the curb and say it depends. And it really does. It depends on what people are used to. We're seeing a lot of that now. Chat applications that people are making tend to just mimic what ChatGPT has already created. And I'm not sure that is going to be the future. I think it is right now because people are used to it. But I would say that what we're going to have from a user experience point of view is eventually not going to be so forthright with, ask a question, get an answer, ask a question, get an answer. It may be that you're going to use other types of modalities in the UX that are more subdued, that are more, related to how you accomplish your job in your particular role or whatever problem you're trying to solve. And AI will just come to the forefront as you need it. And it won't be so blatant as a chat interface. So I think the jury's out a bit on how that may progress, but I have a feeling that the integration of AI into these applications are going to make it a bit more ubiquitous and a bit more intuitive, because your UX tries to make tools that are usable by people and work within their workflows, work within their mindset. And chat interfaces may not always be the right way to accomplish that, whether it's at the top or the bottom.
Yeah, it's occurred to me that we all have cameras on our computers, so doing kind of mapping your facial expressions while you're reading through the answers and everything. It could be like an instant survey that you're taking, and then it understands which answers it didn't like and which answers you do like, and so I find that to be kind of interesting. I think we'll be doing a lot more with that in the future. Just everything from as it's serving up music that we want to listen to, and some of the songs we make a bad face at it and suddenly it changes to something else. I think we'll see a lot of those things in the future.
Yeah, I certainly tend to agree that this idea of sentiment analysis is going to play a part, but that has been typically quite difficult to achieve. There was a company in Austin at one point that was working on this before. I mean, this was about 10 years ago, and they were working on giving sentiment analysis when you're looking at a kiosk, right? And try to understand who you are and what maybe your age is and what you're feeling, and present you with advertising, right? That was based on what you presented to the camera. Right?
Okay.
And that was a very interesting model, and I think they were acquired at the time, and this was quite a number of years ago. But this idea of multiple inputs, I think the UX is going to change a bit. It is right now, right? We have people looking at, well, how do you incorporate chat interfaces? And again, like I said, I don't know that that's going to be the long-term answer. But we may be more conversational, right? You have Whisper that came out, and other recognition. You have 11 Labs with the work they're doing on being able to, generate, really good sounding, voice and narration on the fly. With that, people are already experimenting and figuring out, how can I make my own Alexa? How can I make my own application that you can engage with in a way that you couldn't before? And initially, I think what happens, people try it out, and then they figure out, okay, was it novel and useful, or novel and just novel for novelty's sake? And then you try to figure out where's it going to go? What are people going to be interested in using? I don't know that you're going to get rid of the keyboard anytime soon. But I do think people are experimenting with what's possible.
Well, certainly not on your Commodore 64 that you're still using.
Yeah, it's amazing. I was so happy they deployed Zoom just in time for our call. I've been waiting.
Hello, this is Trent Fowler, co-host of the Futurati podcast. One of the most common pieces of marketing advice I've come across is to know your audience and give them what they want. One difficulty in podcasting is that it's actually pretty hard to do this. None of the major platforms give us any way to reach out to you, our listeners, to find out what you enjoy about the Futurati podcast and what you'd like to see done differently. So we've decided to record this commercial and ask you directly to reach out to us. Head over to futuratipodcast.com, go to the contact page, and drop us a line. Tell us about your favorite and least favorite episodes, what you'd like to see us cover in the future, and anything else you want us to know. We produce this show for you, and we want your advice so we can make it even better. Thank you. So I'm curious. I'm curious about Symphonia, this product that you're developing internally. Can you tell me a little bit about its capabilities and whatever design specs that you can divulge?
Sure. No, it's a tool that we built for ourselves. To be honest, I thought of it years ago when I saw the problems that companies had with keeping all their product requirements straight. Part of what we do at Planorama Design, our professional services, is really, again, trying to keep organized on behalf of our clients with the UX design, the user stories, test cases. And if we can just keep that under control, well organized, easy to navigate around, go between, so when you're looking at a user story, you can jump to the designs. Looking at the designs, you can jump to the stories, jump to the test cases. That makes a big difference for development teams, accelerates them. And so, but we end up using our own, our client systems, whatever systems they're using, whatever they have available. outside of, we bring Figma, we use Figma for the design, but all the other systems for capturing this documentation, it was whatever they already used, whether it was Confluence and Jira or whatever it was. And yet I felt like, these tools, like Jira, for example, great tool for managing projects, but I don't think it's a really good tool for capturing product requirements, for capturing user stories. You tend to have tickets that contain stories or partial stories, and then they kind of float off into the ether after the sprint's done. And how do you keep organized? So, I was thinking of a tool to say, boy, how can we support product managers and again, product teams, but let's just focus on the product managers right now, to give them the ability to create documentation, user stories, to create the I'll say feature maps or user story maps, and have them in one place. And when you have them in one place, they can be very connected, right? You can start traversing and figuring out, here's this particular feature map item. This one is related to a user story over here, and this user story is related to this set of designs over in Figma. And so it's all an interconnected graph, all of these product requirements. But when you have different systems, gosh, it's hard to really maintain all of it and keep track, and you have to jump around a lot. So I didn't feel like anybody was really solving that problem for product managers. And if you solve it for product managers, if you get this well interconnected spec of requirements, well, now the product team benefits, developers benefit, right? They can go and they don't have to go and read the code to figure out how it's supposed to work when they're looking at building new features. Like what was done before? Well, many developers I talk to, they go to read the code instead of going to the spec because the spec is out of date, right? Well, what if the spec wasn't out of date? What if the spec was actually correct, right? How much easier would that make their jobs? And so
how does AI figure into this? How does AI figure into this?
Well, yeah, it's an interesting point. Originally, when I came up with this, AI was not on the scene in the way it is now. And right. So I had, what I just talked about was the kind of the original concept. When AI came into play, I started looking at, what are the struggles of product managers? And by the way, I was in the role of product manager for different companies. So I kind of knew some of the answers off the top of my head. But, I think product management is a lonely job. And you tend to be stuck with like, okay, I have to go be an external facing, figure out what the market's doing, research competition. And then you have to go in and write the user story documentation and actually get the team moving because you end up playing that product owner role many times. And getting past that blank sheet of paper problem, where do I start? How do I write this? How do I start writing a user story? What features should I consider maybe that are ancillary that I should, do research? All of those things are problems that product managers have to face day to day. And we're using AI, and that was the idea, was that we could use AI to get them off the ground, right? To get them past that blank sheet, that blank screen, that blank sheet of paper, and say, look, we can help you start writing the user story. We can help you start thinking about acceptance criteria. It's a lot easier to edit many times than it is to start from scratch.
Yeah.
And so that was one of the problems that we were addressing through AI, and it worked really quite well. And the other one was actually, I didn't quite expect it, but using some of these large language models, like the ones that OpenAI provides, you find that it has a really good ideas. It brainstorms quite well. And so when you start looking at, well, what are the features that I need? Sometimes it can come up with some ideas that get you thinking. And I have to be clear, we're not advocating that you just go and build the features, right? You should do things like user research, like well understood processes to make sure you're building the right thing and you're prioritizing it and those types of things. But it should get you thinking, right? And help you maybe realize what the set of features ought to be that you should consider. And then start evaluating from there. And that's what we're using the AI for as well, to help you with that brainstorming and then get you to the point where you can do the user research and evaluate whether those ideas are good.
How much of this is being handled by the AI now?
How much is being handled for this this type of generation, this type of
Right.
brainstorming?
So is it something that humans turn to periodically, or is it handling quite a large fraction of the workload at this point?
Well, in Symphonia, I can tell you about that. We use the model for, I'd say, a couple different ways. We use it for brainstorming, and that's where the large language models are quite useful, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they're trained on, everything, right? But I'll also say that, of course, they can be expensive. These
Mm-hmm.
they charge per 1,000 tokens, right? It gets to be costly. So we're also investing in using our own local models for a completely different purpose. There's one part of it where you're going to be brainstorming, and I say again, the external models are good for that. But the models, if you're going to be just querying your own content, querying your own project or product descriptions or product requirements, you could do that through the external model too, but you don't need to. You only really, in fact, I think it's vastly overpowered. It's very performant, right? And you pay for it, but you don't need to know about the Napoleonic Wars to answer questions about your own product that you've described in the application. So that's where we're investing in building our own local large language models that are, say, just enough, right? Just enough to be able to handle answering questions about your own project, right? And of course, that's going to be less expensive than using models that are commercially available. So it makes the idea that this could be out there in the public as a product that we could use beyond what we're using ourselves. You could then make it a viable SaaS offering with a business model that could make sense.
So Matt, a lot of times when you have a software product like this, and everybody's using it. I mean, everybody's weighing in on what it should be able to do and what it shouldn't be able to do, and this is right, this is wrong, and they all have their own opinions. And so, while the designers of ChatGPT and some of the other AI programs coming out are probably listening to all this feedback, the tendency might be to go overboard, so it makes the product considerably worse over time. And what we're living through right now might be the best version we ever get. And so I find things like that to be kind of an interesting question that somehow we have to figure out a way to actually continually improve this product without letting it go off the deep end. And that's the danger of having literally billions of people weighing in simultaneously on where it should go. And is there any rules of thumb in the UX world for dealing with things like that?
Well, I was very hesitant when I mentioned before that I released User Story Generator. We did that back last year. And I was running before ChatGPT. It was using just OpenAI's API, and we used it as a mechanism to get feedback from product managers, to see how it worked and to learn from it. Right? It was a learning vehicle. But I was very adamant that this can get you started, but you should be doing user research. Right? There's nothing that should get in the way of actually knowing what your users, what your customers, whoever they are, what they want, what they're needing, what problems they have, and how are you going to solve them. To me, that is where you should derive your priority from. And of course, there are business objectives too, weighing that in, making sure that you're driving forward and on the right path. But UX right now is just giving you ideas for where to go. It doesn't mean that it's right. And I mean, certainly that's the case, even with ChatGPT, right? They can give wrong answers. And I think the general mentality has been, oh, look, it gave me an answer. It must be right. And I'm like, well, you sure don't know that, right? You better go look. So in some ways, it slows you down. I mean, it does speed you up because it can pull data from various sources and give you an answer, but it will slow you down if you do want to validate that the answer is correct. Right?
Yeah.
It's the same idea with users. You should be validating that the ideas it gives you are actually valid, that you talk to people and say, okay, it helped me think about questions to ask, but I need to go ask them.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're very much on the humans will remain in the loop for the foreseeable future team.
I think they will, and this is where I see automation happening. Automation, I think, will be able to take us to code generation, and I think it's kind of exciting. Let me jump back. When I worked at Motorola, I worked on RISC processors and SoCs, and on the RISC processor side, they had what we would often term as a golden model. So when you're doing verification, especially you're doing instruction level verification, so you're running test cases that were usually randomly generated, and you're running them against a golden model, and you're running them against the Verilog, the actual developed logic model. And you look to see if the results are the same and the interim states are the same, and all the registers, where you thought they should be. And what happens is that if it fails, it tells you somebody's wrong. Either your design is wrong or the golden model's wrong. The nice thing about golden models is that over time, they get better and better and better. So they are often correct, and it's usually your design is not living up to the spec. So you could say that golden model is somewhat akin to requirements. So if you're moving now over to the world of software development, you have to get to a place where you have requirements that the AI generating the code can derive from. So that's where I've been considering the fact that requirements is going to still require a lot of human interaction. You still have to figure out, what do you want to build? What do you really need? All the generation that happens afterwards is going to be deriving from those requirements, okay? And right now, it is largely not automated, right? Developers have to sit down and write the code, designers have to go and write or design the screens. But if that ever becomes automated, that requirements portion is going to become a lot more valuable, a lot more interesting.
Right.
And that's part of the reason we're addressing Symphonia in this way, is that the requirements of where if you capture that in one place, if you allow that interconnectivity to expose itself between your scope and your design documents, your user story documents, your test cases, then you can enable some automation to occur later on, even so far as to use that requirements, that source of truth as your golden model, right? As your model by which everything else is developed afterwards. And QA, if there's even any automation in QA, will be going back to that golden model, back to that source of truth to figure out if the code generation was even correct to begin with, right? And so that iterative loop, right, in order to get there. But you need to have some requirements. You need to have something to know, what are you going to check against? It's the same in UX, right? When we design screens, we design them in high fidelity so that developers know what to build, and QA can look at it very easily and say, does what was developed look like what was designed? Yes or no? Right.
Have you given any thought?
Are you enjoying this episode of the Futurati podcast? If so, please like it, give the show a 5-star rating on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and share it with your friends. By far, the best way to help us grow is to spread the word on social media, which will expose our content to more people and help us continue to bring you interviews with world-leading experts in AI, quantum computing, cryptocurrencies, and so much more. Thank you in advance.
It's a reality.
Have you given any thought to hooking these things up to automated theorem provers or program synthesis modules that are able to formally verify that the generated code conforms to the specs? I've asked a couple of people at ATP. Yeah.
Not yet, but we're getting there. I think we're going to, we're early in this process, but I think we collectively are going to get there. In fact, when I worked in verification, I worked a good amount of time in a language called System Verilog Assertions, which is an assertion-based language for used both in simulation-based checking as well as formal verification. right? To basically theorem prove that what you have asserted will be true because of the way you designed it, and you don't need to run simulations against it. And I think certainly you can get to that point with this, and that's why I kind of go back to the stories and the experiences I had in chip design, because I think I see a lot of parallels for how it was problems were solved in that domain, and they may translate over to some degree in the software domain, especially in terms of generation.
So Matt, when a lot of people right now are weighing in with predictions that say that within 5 years we won't need coders anymore, that we can do away with a vast majority of them, and that seems to be kind of a consistent way of thinking about things. My way of thinking about things is that as our capabilities increase, we're going to take on bigger and bigger projects. So I think that we tend to not only need as many coders, we may actually need more coders in the future. It's just that the amount of work that we accomplish over our lifetime might be 20, 50, 100 times greater than it is today. And so I wanted you to kind of help step us through your thinking on that.
I tend to think so too. Whenever any new technology like this comes out, it's the doom and gloom because it sells, right? People tend to read the bad stuff and start fearing for their lives. But I tend to agree that this is a level of automation that will assist us going forward, and we'll be able to produce more versus necessarily replace more. Right. I think our production, our ability to produce will go drastically ahead, and what we can do will speed up, which will mean reduce costs for development, perhaps. But that means that the development team can move forward and work on other things. Doesn't mean that they're going to lose their jobs. And I also think that there's if it goes the way that I was talking about before, with a lot of emphasis on requirements, that means requirements may not be perfect in the beginning, and so the code generated may not be perfect, even if it is generated code. And so you therefore may need developers still to go in and write portions that are very dependent on their involvement and certain algorithms that you want to employ. Again, I'll go back to hardware. In hardware, especially on processors, you have portions of that, and sometimes large portions that are created by synthesis, where there's algorithms that go in and create all the logic for you, lay it out on the sea of gates that are just, they meet the timing requirements, they meet all the requirements that you need, and it's combinational sequential logic that just, is generated. That saves a lot of time, but there is still a need to have engineers go in and create certain circuits and certain logic, because it has to be done a certain way, because we know that's the best way to do it. And I think it's going to follow very similarly in software. You're going to have places where you're still going to need developers to go in and do it the way that we have collectively determined is the right way to do it, because we don't want to leave that to chance. We don't want to leave that to the AI to go and do it its own way. But other portions, like, look, we have a lot of APIs right now. Generating APIs, we try to automate that as much as we can, because if you have a REST API, you have something on the back end, it's going to return data from the database. Like, there's a lot, we've done that ourselves in just human intelligence, trying to automate how easy it is to make back end APIs, because who wants to go and sit down and write that from scratch every time, right? So we progressed down that path already through human intelligence, and I think we're just trying to accelerate that forward with AI. It doesn't mean we're going to talk ourselves out of a job, though.
If you play this forward 5 or 10 years, what do you see as the, call it, mesoscale impact of artificial intelligence? Do you see web development having largely been automated? Do you see new frontiers opening up? Will it largely have been unchanged over that time frame, but maybe over the 10 years after that it will be very big? What predictions do you have for us?
Well, I tend to think that we're going to be able to have solutions created for us on the fly that do certain things that we need. Right? If you want to go and build an application or build an app, right? Mobile app, web app, you want to have some problem be solved. You have to go and do the requirements, do the design work, do the development, get the DevOps involved, get the servers allocated. You got to do all that. It costs, it's a significant barrier to entry to just go and do any of that, right? We might get to the point where that is more automated than we ever could conceive, right? Again, you go back to the requirements. I think the requirements could be very important for the rest of it to go and play out well. But if you can define the requirements well, then generating an application to do something for you maybe minutes away, right? Instead of months, right, or a year away, depending on the complexity of it. So it's going to matter more about how well you define it and maybe iterating on that. I think you also are going to have more, what I'll say, purpose-built solutions that you wouldn't have invested in before because it was too niche, right? It was too focused on something. And
yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So and so if you can automate that and get you to a place where you can, I need like a CRM to help me with this particular niche, right? Then you could have something generated for you and focus directly on that and iterate, continually refine your requirements until you get something that's, oh, this is good enough. This is great. This is what I need. So I have a feeling that these the automation of generating applications is going to be something that we just haven't seen before. And that is going to impact us in ways that, we're not, I've thought about it, but I don't quite know how that's going, what that's going to do for the rest of it. Like, what is that going to do day to day? What does that look like?
So in the past, I've worked with entrepreneurs quite a bit. And any entrepreneurship classes in college, they start off with writing a business plan. And the business plan becomes this major barrier, barrier to entry. And people who actually have really good ideas for business they want to get off the ground, they think they have to get the business plan done, and they never actually get it done. And so they feel like they can't ever start the business.
Yeah.
Now with ChatGPT, you can put in a few lines of the business plan and it'll generate the whole damn thing for you. And I always think about every business plan is wrong to begin with anyway. Yeah. So the fact that it might be wrong coming out of ChatGPT is not a big deal. But it gives you a starting point. It takes that barrier to entry out of the way. Any thoughts on that?
I think so. We may be using AI in a very agile way, right? Like agile, what is it based on? Well, if you can learn during the process, then you should be using agile, right? If you assume that you know everything up front, then use waterfall to generate software. If you believe that you can learn through the process, then use agile. And I think that this idea that you could have a business plan and you could agilely create your business plan and get feedback immediately and learn from every other business plan out there, right? And models that are going to be trained in very specific types of genres or corpuses of text, so whatever it is, right? You have certain models trained in certain ways. You'll be able to learn from different, say, business plans and generate yours and refine yours, and perhaps even on the side have it start generating code for design prototypes or actual functional prototypes while you're doing it, right? People were doing that already. They were trying out something. Of course, there's a frenzy of it right now with people using LangChain and AutoGPT to see, like, hey, how much does this know? If I just follow the directions, if I just do what it says, will I achieve fame, riches, and glory? And people are after that. They're trying to figure out what do I do with this? How much can it help me? It is helpful to know how these applications, how these language models work. And I have to credit, when I first learned about transformers, I learned from them from a channel called Computer File out in the UK, and I love those guys out there.
I just wrapped up an interview with one of their guys, Rob Miles. The interview right before, yeah, the one that's going out right before yours is Rob Miles. Yeah.
Ah, cool. Well, I love those guys. I love what they do. I've learned so much from them, and I really feel like that when you understand how these language models work, you realize it's not magic, right? So it's on how well the model is trained on what you're trying to accomplish, and you have to think of it a bit more sensibly. If you think of it as a black box, then it can do all the magic in the world. If you start really trying to understand what's behind the curtain, then you can see what is it capable of, what is it not. But I tend to think that, Thomas, what you were saying about the business models made me think that we're going to have models that are more well trained on certain tasks, rather than models that are just as general purpose as GPT-3 and 4 and 3.5 Turbo. As I said before, you don't have to know about the Napoleonic Wars to answer questions about my own project, right? And if you're going to use the LLM for certain tasks, you can train it in ways that will allow you to do certain things really well. Maybe interpreting business plans and giving feedback, and having information about how well these business plans eventually resulted in businesses that were successful, and the parameters of that successful business versus the original, maybe the evolution of that business plan to becoming a successful business, right? That might be an interesting set of data to train on, and then allow you to get feedback on your model, and tell you the sources, like, oh, what you're trying to do, this was done by these three other companies, and here's why it worked for some of them, and here's why it didn't for others, right? That's really useful. But the AI models right now, I think they're the general purpose ones are general purpose, and they're not going to give you necessarily that depth or detailed information that you would want to accomplish those tasks that you're talking about.
Do you need a dynamic and knowledgeable speaker for an event? Thomas Fry and me, Trent Fowler, are both seasoned keynote speakers, able to converse on a wide array of topics to audiences of all sizes and skill levels. Go to the contact page at futuratiPodcast.com to book Thomas or myself today, and let us apply our years of experience in public speaking to make your event a smashing success.
I'm really excited to see the economic impacts of all of this and how it plays out. I share your contention that you will see a lot more bespoke solutions to problems. I don't think I know anybody who has a small business or does anything at all who doesn't have some app idea, who's tried all the ones that are out there and they just don't quite match the edge cases. And when it becomes possible to summon the software, I just sort of wonder what that's going to do to network effects, what that's going to do to the economics of the software development profession, how that will redound to change the way all these things work and fit together. It's like, are you still going to have libraries of code, or is it just going to be too much hassle to maintain them? It just makes more sense to ask for it when you want it again. You just want your fresh copy of things. Yeah. So are you going to have some monoliths? You have these giant software tools that do something LLMs can't do, and then just billions and billions of these little micro programs that are almost indistinguishable from each other, but nobody bothered to check because it's quicker to just ask. It's quicker to just summon one, right?
Yeah, that's right. I tend to think if we do get to this path where we're summoning and creating these little applications, even on the fly, we still may have a data problem. Like, where is this data stored and located, right? And so you getting to it and having the ability to, you could just leave it to a vector database to try to figure it out. But I think you do have to have some type of semantic organization among all this data, even if you are creating applications on the fly.
See, that's where the robotic dog comes into play, because when you need that data, you just go tell them to fetch it, go get that data. And so
data dog.
The data dog goes out and gets it.
Someone should start a company called
that'll probably be. Oh, okay, got it. There you go. let me get on that.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. So you think data will be different? Because why wouldn't I just summon a database, a bespoke data storage layer for just this particular thing? Why would that be resistant to the LLMs, but the applications would not?
No. I don't mean that they're going to be resistant. I mean that I think if you have applications that are built in the way I talked about, where they're built on the fly, then the data for them has to be stored somewhere too, right? And that data, if you create applications on the fly, that data should have some type of semantic organization that allows it to plug into another layer so it can be accessed by other applications, right? When you build any application today, you not only have to think about the human-computer interface, but also the interface between other applications, between other APIs and things like that. So I think I'm not saying it's going to be impossible. I think it's something we have to consider as a result of this ability to just rapidly create applications, because the data it's going to produce may need to have longevity, even beyond the application itself, the usage of the application itself.
Well, that's fascinating. Do you have any final thoughts you want to leave the Futurati podcast audience with?
Some warm fuzz that we can look forward to.
Something positive. We've been doing a lot of AI safety stuff. It hasn't been super cheerful. So
no, I get that. Well, I mean, super cheerful or super, fuzzy. I think good things are ahead. I think when I first talked to you all, I really feel like this is akin to the late 90s, when the web was coming out and everybody's just trying to figure out, what do we do? What do we do with this? And I haven't felt that way. I mean, I know, blockchain became popular a number of years ago, and of course we had that crash, but the concept of blockchain is very interesting in and of itself. I think it actually will help with AI, to be honest. I think there's going to be some connectivity between AI and blockchain, because blockchain can provide some level of authenticity to information generated. And the problem we have today is that AI can generate images or photos, or change things in ways that we can't even tell if it was AI generated or not. But blockchain can help with validating some of the authenticity of where it came from. Regardless, that's kind of a sidebar. I think that we are, in a frenzy right now. Everybody's trying to test and figure things out. That's what we're doing at Planorama, right? My R&D arm, we're trying to figure things out, testing. We have certain goals. We are, for product teams with Symphonia, we're trying to figure out how to support them better using AI, and still, drive business objectives and make people more efficient. Those are good things, and I think a lot of people are working on some very good things, right? And some will pass, and some will die out, but that's how it works. That's how it worked in the web 1.0 days, right? People are trying things out, and out of that, you'll have a distillation process where we'll be left hopefully with some very good technologies that will carry forward and change the way that we work and live. And that remains to be seen. And that's something I can't predict.
Well, fantastic. Thanks so much, Matt. We appreciate your insight and your perspective, and we wish you the best in future endeavors.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Thomas.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. This is great.
Thank you.
That was interesting. Yeah.